Hi, Nicole here. This is Impact 10 from Movies That Matter, our series highlighting our favorite films that helped change the world. Today's topic, just in time for Pride Month, is queer cinema. And since it's such a big topic, I'm joined by Garret, Lexy, and Stacy, and we're going to divide it up into 4 pieces. I'll be covering AIDS, Stacy will be covering awards, Garret will be covering culture, and Lexy will be covering politics.
Hey everybody, Stacy here. I'm going to talk a little bit about award-winning LGBTQ films. Often a film exploring those characters and themes will garner more attention and affect more change in mainstream culture as a result of receiving high-profile awards, right? In particular, an Academy Award, to be realistic. As a straight woman raised in heteronormative culture, I cannot confidently speak to which films have meant what to the queer community, but I can confidently speak to which ones got straight people talking and thinking in a new way about our, LGBTQ neighbors, friends, and relatives. In so doing, earning each of the following films a solid 10 on my social impact scale. So, of course, there's classics, going back as far as Cabaret, which won like every award except Best Picture that year, I think 1973. The Crying Game is a notable one. Philadelphia and Milk, which are going to be discussed in this video. But to me, the big one, Brokeback Mountain. I mean, no contest. Both the commercial and critical success. In 2006, it received the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Original Score, well deserved by Gustavo Santaolalla. The Wings, that song, The Wings, that destroys me every time. And of course, Best Director for Ang Lee, who, no newbie to queer film, had also directed at that point The Wedding Banquet, a comedy about a gay couple in New York, I believe. Incidentally, upon Lee's Best Director win, the Chinese media said, and this is a quote, "He is the pride of the Chinese people all over the world," even after they had completely banned the film. Like, you couldn't see Brokeback Mountain in a theater anywhere in China. But anyway, so having spawned many a crude joke about gay cowboys, despite being about 2 bisexual shepherds, Oscar viewers leading up into the award show that year, Oscar viewers either anticipated or braced themselves for host Jon Stewart and other presenters to pepper the proceedings with the occasional lame innuendo about gay cowboys, right? Knowing this full well, Jon Stewart nipped us in the bud at the very beginning of the ceremony. I mean, before the first commercial break, by presenting a montage of homoerotic scenes with homoerotic undertones in Old West films, primarily from the 50s, the golden age of Westerns, but also throughout the rest of cinematic history. And it was really brilliant because it really just turned that idea of traditional masculinity on its head. And the message was clear, like, grow up, right? The film is almost single-handedly responsible for moving queer cinema into the mainstream. And I still remember that feeling of seeing the theater poster up alongside, action flicks and comedies, and knowing truly that the cat was out of the bag. Like, no one could pretend to look away from these people and these characters anymore. And that's how it became for me. It is the film against which I measure all other films on the social impact scale. If it doesn't come close to Innocent Jack Twist's epic love story, it doesn't get a 10. And then, of course, more recently, another, huge moment in cinematic history, Moonlight, getting the 2017 Golden Globe for Best Picture, the 2017 Academy Award for Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor for Mahershala Ali, Best Adapted Screenplay for Brett Jenkins, and the first Best Picture Oscar winner to ever have a gay character as its protagonist, which is almost unthinkable. I think it's too soon to tell what the legacy to this, to Moonlight will be attached to this story that gave, such a voice to a grossly underrepresented demographic. In the 90s, the words crying game quickly came to mean having a transgender girlfriend, like that's what referred to. At the millennium, broke back came to signify two men in love. Surprisingly, yet appropriately, because of, the switch at the Oscar ceremony, the big switch that rightfully took the award from La La Land, a film glorifying the white monoculture of the past, and giving it to Moonlight, which clearly deserved it. The word moonlight has almost come to carry the connotation of a wrong being righted. So I don't know what the future holds, but it's certainly, it's promising.
So when I first set out to do AIDS in queer cinema, the movie I really wanted to do was Longtime Companion. It came out in 1989, and it featured a young Campbell Scott, Dermot Mulroney, Mary Louise Parker, and it was the first wide-release movie about AIDS in the gay community. It's a beautiful film. It's fallen out of favor, and it is not available anywhere. So sorry to recommend something that you can't see. But it really was an important film at the time, and it really tackled how the community level of the AIDS crisis and how difficult it was to lose so many people, so many of your friends, so many people that you knew to AIDS. Unlike the movie I am going to focus on, Philadelphia. So Philadelphia came out in 1993. And it was very much a movie that intentionally tried to change the world. Jonathan Demme and the director and the writer kind of had just known people who were diagnosed, and they really set out to make a movie to help eradicate the stigma on gay people with AIDS. And so it's interesting. Sometimes you kind of fall into having a big impact, but this was very intentional. And when I, thought about this topic and watched the movie, I really do remember what it was like at that time, how terrifying it was to think about getting AIDS. There were no good treatments. You were definitely gonna die. And not only were you gonna die, you were going to go through a long, sort of painful, debilitating illness before death. So, it was absolutely frightening. And yeah, people were afraid to share water glasses or shake hands. And I got so much like sex education, I'm chock-a-block with, how to prevent STIs. And, when this movie came out, in the center of all of that, they, just having Tom Hanks, first of all, fresh off of Sleepless in Seattle, still America's sort of favorite boy next door type character, play this part, be the person to be gay and to have AIDS was huge. And not only did, they have Tom Hanks, even, for the 90s and frankly, even for now, the character doesn't have a lot of quote unquote gay affectations, no lisp, no flamboyant dress, very much written and played to seem like, any person you could meet. And, I there's plenty of movies, like I said, to this day that don't portray, trade in gay stereotypes. They also have, they had over 50 extras from an AIDS clinic in Philadelphia. So you actually saw the real face of AIDS. And sadly, almost none of those people survived. I believe there was one survivor after several years of the movie coming out. And they also had this very loving family. They didn't want to tell a story about, a gay person being rejected by their family, either for being gay or for having AIDS, which I think was, again, it's still a little bit unusual. So many stories in queer cinema are about coming out and having to deal with the rejection. They were like, let's just skip it. Let's just have him have this like warm, loving family. And to me, it's just, it's It was hugely popular. It did everything kind of they set out to do. You can't change everybody's minds. You can't win everybody over. But undeniably, watching Tom Hanks, go through this movie and get so sick, and when he finally leaves, it's just so affecting, and it really did touch people in America. And to me, it's just so admirable that they, that they made this movie, and that it really did help humanize our collective approach to the gay community and to people with AIDS.
Hey YouTube and listeners, this is Lexy, and I'm here to talk about queer movies that are more focused around activism and also politics. I'm sure the other hosts have said this, but these are movies that I would personally give a social impact score of 10. You may disagree, that's fine. Feel free to discuss it in the comments below, or also in our Facebook group, where we like to discuss movies over there as well. And there are a number of movies around activism in the queer community. These movies typically focus maybe about Stonewall, or there are a number about the AIDS crisis in the 80s. But the movies that I'm talking about today aren't about either of those. But there's tons of good movies out there. The first movie I'm going to discuss is Pride, which was released in 2014, and I'm also going to talk about Milk, which was released in 2008. And I'll start with Pride. Pride was a movie that took place in 1985, United Kingdom. And it's about this unlikely alliance between the miners in this Welsh town and an LGBT group in London. And they band together to help the miners win the strike and sort of try and defeat Thatcher, who was the prime minister at the time. And I really like this movie because I think it's a really good balance between serious aspects, but also showing, gay people being happy. And the movie also at times is very lighthearted. And I think early in the 2000s, when we did have queer representation, it was usually these dramatic, intense films that, showed that, the main character, everything bad happened to them. It was, if you were gay, everything bad had to happen to you. And homophobia is real. Bad things definitely happen to gay people, but there's also so many other stories that we can tell. And again, that gay people can, that homophobia is real, but gay people can also be happy and thriving and, living their best lives. And I think this movie does a really good balance of having both in there. Moving on to Milk, which was released earlier in 2008. Milk is a biopic about the politician Harvey Milk, who is played by Sean Penn. And Harvey Milk is very notable for being the first openly gay man to be elected to major office in the state of California. And Milk, again, was released in 2008, and I think it was the beginning or sort of part of the turning point that led into the 2010s of certain landmark decisions being made, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and also more queer representation on TV and in cinema. Specifically in the year after the movie was released, President Barack Obama sort of gave in his honor the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Harvey Milk. Also the year after, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger made May 22nd Harvey Milk Day in California. 2008 was also a big year in California for sort of, I guess, LGBT history, because gay marriage had been legalized that year, but then a proposition was immediately put on the ballot, Proposition 8, to then re-ban gay marriage. And so it was a big topic in California. San Francisco is actually where I'm from, so I remember it being talked about all throughout the year. It was, lots of discussions, and it was definitely, I was pretty young at that point. It was sort of, Milk, the movie, was definitely one of my first introductions to sort of the structural barriers that, inhibit the LGBTQ community. Both these films are really good. I definitely recommend checking out both of them. One of the main messages I definitely saw present in both movies around activism was, uniting different minority communities to stand against a common problem. As Sean Penn said in the movie Milk, the problems that affect us, i.e. gay people, affects us all. There's so much more I could talk about, but we'll have a group discussion later in the video. See you then.
Hey everyone, Garrett here. And today I'm here to talk about movies that have really been a cult classic, especially during the time of Pride. So today's two movies I'm going to talk about are Hedwig and the Angry Inch, the 2001 movie written and directed and starring John Cameron Mitchell, based off of him and Stephen Tresk's play that they came out in 1998, also starring Miriam Shore. And I'm also going to be talking about the cult classic, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, 1975. I know you guys have seen it. Directed by Jim Sharman, starring Tim Curry, Susan Sarandon, and Barry Bostwick. So why are these movies important, and why are they cult classics? A lot of that has to do with what they were trying to accomplish back in the day. Gotta remember, Rocky Horror came out just 6 years after the Stonewall riots, when sexual liberation was at the forefront of everything, and people were really trying to get involved in exploring their gender identity. It was new, it was exciting. But Rocky Horror Picture Show kind of pushed the boundary. It was the first time we saw in mainstream media gender fluidity, drag as a main concept, not as a joke, and the characters were transgender, non-binary, and it was a really kind of unique experience for movie theater goers to see, because it kind of allowed for both the theater community to transform an experience that no one had ever had before, but it also allowed people to kind of flirt with gender and understand that, wow, things might always not be what they seem. And, the Rocky Horror, people who go together with Rocky Horror are always oh my god, I love it because of the props, I love it because of this. But really, you go to a Rocky Horror show because it's an experience to kind of live outside the norm. And that's exactly what Rocky Horror was trying to do. And why that's so important during Pride Month is because it's really opened up the door to a lot of gender-bending media and movies that have really kind of taken drag in full stride. But also, really, for the first time, people were seeing themselves represented on a screen when they'd never seen that before. And that's why this one gets an Impact 10 score, because it's so unique in the way that it adapts digestible material for people who might think it's a little camp, it's a little extra, but allowing it to be a representation for gender expressions and transgender identifying individuals to really be represented in some theater. And that kind of leads me to Hedwig. Hedwig and the Angry Inch. If you don't know, it's about a Eastern Berlin rock band, and it's about how their journey to come to America and how they were forced into a gender surgery to become more woman-like so that they could sneak into the country. But this movie really pushed a lot of boundaries because it was so crazy off the wall. If you've never seen the play, highly would recommend. But it's really just taking us in and out of different types of queer identities. Everyone in the film is some sort of queer identity. They all play with gender. Men wear women's clothing. Women wear men's clothing. The music is about reaffirming and being who you are. But it's another queer cult classic that really was exciting at the time, because the play was a huge hit in the queer community. But then they adopted it again for mainstream media and gave it more of that film digestible approach for people who maybe couldn't go see the play or something. And that was a nice pivotal moment where we kind of again saw it's okay to have these conversations about gender. It's okay not to feel you have to be comfortable in your skin. And what that means is that you can adapt and you can live and experience. I think another example of this is To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar. that was the first time we had seen men who were straight actors. I mean, we'll put straight in quotation marks because they are straight on paper, but a lot of people questioned their sexuality during that time. Are these men really gay? Are they not? Who? But Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, really kind of said, hey, here are these masculine men who can step into a role and play drag. And drag is a performance. It is a lifestyle. It is all of the above. But when thinking about how Rocky Horror, Hedwig and the Angry Inch, Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, really kind of took us out of these cult classics because they were the first time to push the envelope. They were the first people to really be like, hey, this is us. We're here. We're queer. And you don't have to be just gay, lesbian. You can be whatever you want. And really, during that time, it was about like exploring who you wanted to be. And when you explore who you want to be, that's one of the most amazing parts. That's why they both get an impact 10 for me. Love queer culture, love queer movies. This has been a great podcast. Happy Pride, everybody.
Now that we've like watched all our different two kind of themes came out to me from what we were talking about. I think one, and I think this is it's something that was a little more present in Garret and Stacy's clips. But one thing that I think that people always really respond to about queer cinema is that queer is often just a code for feeling different, feeling like you don't belong, feeling like your family doesn't understand you, feeling oppressed for something that you can't change. And so these movies can speak to a broader audience because there's so many people who feel like that for reasons maybe that are not about their sexual preference or how they look or how they talk, or if they're in the theater community, right? Like every theater kid watches Rocky Horror. That's given. And so it's really just about connecting with, a character or characters who just don't fit the norm.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that kind of came up in a lot of our discussions of our films is like, these were big events because it was digestible mainstream media representation for the first time in a lot of these films. Whether it was, activism, we saw like the story of Harvey Milk. How many people had actually like really followed what was going on during that time?
Yeah.
Or like Nicole, when we were talking about tackling the AIDS crisis, like it's not something we talked about a lot. And then Stacy, I think you pointed out a good point of like how it has to get down to trickle down culture. So no, I thought that was a really good point from everybody's videos that like, this is the first time that it was like really digestible material in the mainstream media, and representation really matters. I think Stacy pointed out a really good point in her video where she's like, things became mainstream words based off of these like media representation and culture. But
I thought that was so cool.
It was the first time really we had seen AIDS crisis be talked about outside of like, independent communities. It was the first time we'd really seen activism, the story of Harvey Milk, be told. Like they were important, I think, and I think that's the theme that I kind of took away from all you guys too. I like that we did it separately and then had the same result. That like, representation matters, and trickle down representation really matters because it means something different for a kid in the 1970s to see Rocky Horror than it does now. But we couldn't have got all these other gay queer cinemas without like movies that really changed the way for us.
I agree. And I think like representation is such an interesting topic because I think for way back when Philadelphia was made, or even to Stacy's point of Brokeback Mountain, I think it was important in certain ways to have straight actors, play those parts, or Julie Newmar, like you said, Garret. And I think that honestly, unfortunately, people weren't always ready to have a gay actor play a gay part, which is ridiculous, but it's like it made it more palatable. And again, I think Tom Hanks, it could only have been Tom Hanks at that moment. Like it was so the right pick for that part to get as many like mainstream people to buy into Philadelphia. But, it's nice to see a broadening of that and let gay actors, portray their own characters.
Sure. I feel like at the time, Rupert Everett was the only one doing that, really, for about 15 years. He just got all the gay roles. He was every gay best friend. Yeah.
Well,
And there was nothing wrong with that. Well, we could have used more, but I'm not for denying Rupert Everett like any part.
The value of Rupert Everett. Yeah, no one is questioning the value of Rupert Everett. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said. And even watching Milk, that was the visual or being seen aspect was very big in Milk's philosophy. And we know we need to show that we are out here, that so many of us, that we're not just like this small group of people, or that we don't matter, but that we are here, and like we can make a difference. And he showed that by having the queer community. Like, I think they helped out with protesting Coors, and then the Teamsters in return started hiring gay truck drivers. And so, yeah, I think being seen is super important. Forgive me if I am bringing it into a totally different subject, but one thing I wasn't sure if you guys thought about while watching your movies is that um, specifically in the movie Milk, they he was talking about being seen, making sure to come out to your parents, making sure to come out to your friends. And I was thinking about how now there's also this focus on, you don't have to come out yet, you don't have to, if you're not ready. And that was sort of one thing when I was watching the movies that I was watching, is that because Milk came out in 2008, and that was there going to be anything that was sort of not cool now that maybe was cool in 2008? And I was wondering, I wonder how people would think about that, like, because there is more of this movement now of like, come out when you're ready, come out when it's safe. So I wasn't sure if you guys also saw that with any of your movies, especially ones that came out earlier, if things have sort of changed because the movement has changed.
I think that, Moonlight would, I think, be a really good example of like, sometimes coming out is not actually the healthiest thing, because of like your community and your identity is protected. While it does, we know, bring a lot of like self gratification and really self acceptance. I think that probably the newer movies might speak to it as well as some of the older ones. Rocky Horror was about being out, being loud, being proud. Like, that was the whole theme. But I think that made it more normalized, to your point, for people to be like, it's okay if I'm not quite that flamboyant, extravagant, out. I'm not that out. But I can experience my gender and identity in different ways, maybe that may be similar, but not so outward. So I think movies like Milk, that showed kind of, it's okay, take your own journey, but also like both ends of the spectrum are needed for like Moonlight, where it's like, I understand staying with your culture and not coming out, to like Rocky Horror, that's like, we are completely out, everybody is here, everybody is queer, let's do the thing. And I think it's important that that spectrum really kind of gets brought up. And I think that's an excellent point. It's like, being prideful is not about, your gender identity, your sexual orientation. Being proud is about accepting yourself for things that might have been different than what you expected when you were a child, or when you were born, or being raised. And I think that's I'm sure I could think of tons of others, but I think that that's a good point you make, Lexi, is that it's okay to like come out when you're ready and be proud of who you are and your identity and what that means to you, whether someone can see it or not. I think sometimes we assume a lot of identities that we don't know. And so that just like waiting, say, I'm here and I'm accepting when you're ready, if you need to.
Oh, you got me thinking, Garret, about particularly in my two selections, Brokeback Mountain and Moonlight, masculinity and the identity of being a man was pretty heavy in both of those films, right? In fact, I kept reading when I was looking up sort of film criticism at the time about Brokeback. A lot of, apparently there was a very common interpretation that they were both straight men who fell in love. Like that's how, yeah, I just, as far as like, Webster's dictionary for gay, quite sure how that works. But just to show that, this idea of, your identity, what I am, who I am, and how that fits in with, who I love and who I sleep with, and that was all just very, very contentious for both both sets of characters that I was discussing.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking we could again, we just like we dipped the teeniest little toe in queer cinema, right? Like we could do a whole video series just on coming out movies,
Yeah.
right? There's so many of them, there's so many good ones. And they have changed over time. The stories that get told about how to come out in 2010 versus 2000 versus 1990, like those, the culture has shifted, the expectations have shifted. And I wonder too, to your point, Lexy, like if every, it's still a very personal decision. And then suddenly when the culture shifts and people are like, but being gay is fine now, you should come out. Like, well, not necessarily. Like, yeah, it's like maybe that isn't something that you want to do.
And there are still parts of the country where it's still not very safe to come out, unfortunately.
Yeah, and families, cultures, subcultures, like, it can be taught. I mean, honestly, like I was rewatching The Big Sick last night. I was like, and like him just marrying a non-Pakistani woman was like the end of the world. Like, yeah, like, So, but then again, it's like I said, it's such a universal story of making that decision to say, this is a thing about myself that may not be that culturally acceptable. It may not be that acceptable to my family, but I am coming forward with that. And I think that, I think we're shifting a little bit more to trans stories and like non-binary stories, but I don't think we've had our Impact 10 movie. Well, I mean, on trans, we definitely have. Stacy brought up Crying Game. But that the non-binary, I think, community is going to have hopefully their big wide release someday soon.
Well, and I think why I was so fascinated with like doing cult classics is because like Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, The Birdcage, To Wong Fu, these things that were very Rocky Horror, things are very out loud and proud or great. We love that. I love those because they are cult classics for a reason, because we can identify with the funniness and stuff like that. But I'm with you, Nicole. I would like to see some movies where like, where is my non-binary people? I don't have to be this giant, and I'm going to use this word myself. Sometimes I think that like gays are put like out to be a spectacle. Like if you're going to be gay, you have to be completely gay because you got so much crap for being partially gay, half gay, bisexual, not gay enough. Mm-hmm. And now like people were like, in the early cult classics, people were like, well, if you want us to be gay, here we are. We are completely queer. Mm-hmm. Like I agree with all three of your points, but like I'm really looking forward to movies where it's like it's okay to come out when you come out, and it's okay not to understand your identity in terms of like sexual orientations that may be represented, or in terms of gender fluidity. Like it may be okay to be different, and your story is you, and there are reasons people don't come out that are nothing other than to do with hey, this is I need my basic needs met first. I need shelter, I need food, I need a job. There's still places in the world that you can be put to death for being LGBT. There's still, most workplaces can still fire you for being an LGBT person. Like there are all these protections that are not there. So it's no one's decision to say who should come out when. And I think there used to be such a big push of like, we need you to come out to show you're queer and here so we can like identify you and protect you. But now we have so many more people becoming allies. And I think that is like something that we sometimes maybe take for granted, that we have more allies than we've ever had. Could we have more? Absolutely. But I think especially right now, one of the big movements is like, if you're going to say Black Lives Matter, that means all Black lives, the gay, the trans, every Black person matters. And that's something that the culture itself is coming to grips with right now. You can't say
I'm here if you're not going to support your brothers and sisters, or your siblings, excuse me, the new word, if you're not going to support your siblings who are queer, people of color as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I think that's where film and society, where film really does help push the needle on society too, is that, of all the movies we discussed and some we didn't, there's so many different versions of, being queer in each movie. And it's like, I agree, there was some gatekeeping. There's always gatekeeping in communities. Like, that's sad to say, you're not the right type of whatever, fill in the blank.
Right.
But, I think movies have, once you hit that critical mass where there's all these different versions of what it looks like to be gay, to be really flamboyant, if that's what you like, to be, not as flamboyant, to be semi-closeted, all these versions. And I think that's where I think, again, movies really kind of push that needle. And I think, I think still with trans, I think we need more stories, more mainstream, frankly, to get out. It's nice to have a movie that's just for you. I totally support that. I'm not saying that I don't, but sometimes to have that impact, you kind of need to make it for a wider audience.
Yeah, and if we talk to, if representation matters,
Yeah.
just seeing trans actors on TV helps quite a bit. But I think, and then I look forward to like the next couple of years, biopic movies that we really start to see some of these trans activists who have come through. I know we plugged Marsha P. Johnson on Netflix so many times. Those type of things. Trans identifying actors are starting to be like, hey, we want to play roles about trans people. We don't just want to play a role. We want to actually take up the role and the mantle. And I really look forward to where that leads us in cinema in the next couple of years.
I have one quick fact about gatekeeping, which could be interesting. So when I was doing research or after rewatching Milk, I was doing some research, also looking at reviews and criticisms and whatnot. And one of the criticisms for Milk was that, so throughout most of the movie, they show him sort of in two monogamous relationships, one with Scott Smith and one with I'm forgetting the other guy's name. And one of the criticisms that I read in a couple different reviews was that Harvey Milk was also known to be sort of very non-monogamous and had, lots of different partners, and that wasn't really shown that much in the movie. And sort of to your guys' points, I think that's an example of, trying to fit this sort of mainstream bill that, like, sometimes the activists that are pushed forward into the more public light are the more like stand-up members of society. And that's definitely something I thought of when you guys were talking about gatekeeping. So I thought that was interesting. I wanted to add in there.
Yeah.
What's so important, I think, about a lot of these selections is that they do have a range of characters, and it's, I don't think it's an overgeneralization to say that the Black community and Black characters went through something similar, where you went from them being, the characters being ridiculous, right?
Nothing about birth and no babies.
Oh yeah, right. And then they eventually, as philosophy shifted, they became angels, right? They could only be portrayed as extraordinarily intelligent, like never, just really, really virtuous, like never doing anything wrong ever. And then only when, ideas really matured, or they allowed to be flawed or just tacky. They're allowed to be slutty or whatever they wanted to be. And so, yeah, I think it's great to have like the more flamboyant characters, the more subdued characters, the virtuous, the awful. And that's, I think, when that you've really made some progress, is when everybody's allowed to be, in a story.
I agree. I was just thinking of the movie, the Stonewall movie that came out, and everybody was like, Stonewall, New York City. Why is this whole movie filled with white people? Like the trans people and the people of and thankfully, like the movie flopped because people were PO'd because it was a total erasure.
Yeah.
It was just shocking anyone would even try that in this day of age. But yeah.
Nicole, we talked about this when we talked about Bohemian Rhapsody. Before it was published, there was a lot of the original script had taken out almost all of Freddie Mercury's like AIDS crisis and his homosexuality completely.
What?
Oh yeah. It went through many different writings and iterations before how many directors did it go through? I think like 3 directors before it had its final director. But
did an actor leave as well?
Yeah.
Aaron Cohen was supposed to do it.
Yeah.
But I told Nicole, I was like, we cannot do this for the podcast. The community is really upset about this because they had whitewashed, unironically.
Yeah.
They had virtue signaled him out completely and was just like, no, he didn't have any problem with AIDS. And so when it came out, Nicole and I had a really good discussion about it. At least they included some, but I agree to your point.
Very little.
Yeah, I agree to your point, Stacy. It's like they missed, Freddie Mercury had a very flamboyant lifestyle. That was who he was. And with his flamboyant lifestyle came his multiple sexual partners, his use of drugs, his, lack of regard for sexual health. And that's okay. That's important to see because without it, we're just putting it under a rug and not talking about it ever. And if we don't talk about it, we can't have education around it.
Yeah, and we certainly don't do anyone a service. We're not doing anyone any favors by portraying them as just like ethereal little, pixies that fly around being lovely all the time. Like that's not helpful.
Right.
Yeah, and it brings it back to sort of what we were talking about earlier. Maybe this is how we fed into this, but that like within the Black Lives Matter or LGBT lives matter, like even the people who fit the bad stereotypes, their lives matter. Even the people who are, not wealthy or struggling, their lives matter. It's important about lifting everyone up.
I do say everybody who is watching this, listening to this, happy Pride. Again, Pride is not about, having to go in a parade 10 times and do it. Pride is not about having to march. Pride is not about having the outfits. Pride is not about having to see your friends. Pride is about how you feel inside. And I want every single person who's listening or watching this to feel proud about who they are and understand that who you are inside is for you. And when you're ready to share that, this family has you, and we always will.
Yeah, we love you, whoever you are. We're proud of you. Yeah, and I will just say, this is not the last time I think we're going to cover aspects of queer cinema. There's just like too many great Impact 10 movies. And we all thought of a million more that we didn't get to cover. So yeah, stay tuned to, I believe July's topic is going to be politics. So thanks everyone for checking out our very first in our new video series. So remember, movies matter, and
so
do
you.